Lewis Clark State College students of African history. Welcome to week 2. I'm Professor Eric Martin, and I want to try to keep this semi short because I've already put together a video about what to do for this week, and that's in the week 2 page module thing. But since I'm kind of putting this class together as we go, I thought it might be useful to have 10-minute, I don't know, videos that kind of bridge the gaps and explain this is what happened last week, this is what I'm hoping to get accomplished this week. Maybe throw a little mini lecturette in there. I don't know. I don't know if we need these every week, but I think we need them now. All right. So let's talk about what happened last week. Okay, so last week, easy enough. Got this video over the syllabus that you were supposed to have gone through, this video over how we're using Canvas. I didn't get a whole lot of questions about those, so I assume they were more or less self-explanatory. And then I'm going to scoop down here to the bottom here. For those of y'all who haven't seen the What is History lecture, you needed to look at that. And then this part here is the setup, and I'm going to do one of these for each week. All right, that gets us to the big assignments for last week, which was to do the introductions and to look at the Basil Davidson video. I loved your introductions, right? It's really great to get to know each other and get to find out what everybody is interested in. I'll tell you a quick thing about myself that I don't think I brought up, but I'll bring up. I am not an Africanist. Africa is not my historical specialty, but I was trained by two of them. All right, for my master's thesis, I was trained by an Africanist. For my PhD dissertation, I was trained by an Africanist, so I know something about it, and it's a part of my work, right? I'm a little more comparative. So I wanted to throw that out there as far as my historical background. But I love this stuff. I think it's interesting stuff. Now, let's talk about the discussion. Okay, I want to talk about the mechanics of the discussion, and then I want to talk about the details of the discussion. So let's talk about mechanics. The mechanics go like this. Here we go. For the most part, what y'all had was pretty good, with kind of two exceptions that we'll talk about here. And the biggest exception was when you're a discussion leader, and this last week everybody was a discussion leader, I need 2 postings up. One by the end of the day, whatever the day is, okay, and it fluctuates. And that posting is to get things kicked off, to get the discussion moving. If you're the discussion leader, then the discussion doesn't get moving if you don't put a posting up until Saturday or whatever, right? And then you go back through that and you see what needs to be filled in, and here's your here is your follow-up posting. Okay? So some of y'all did a good job getting the discussion, the initial one up. There wasn't a follow-up. Some of y'all probably just looked at the course outline on the syllabus and saw that, oh, it's due January 20th, and just got your things up on the 20th, not paying attention to the discussion details that says you got to get that thing kicked off a couple of days earlier. All right. Now, how's that going to play out in the future? Let's just make it easy, right? I'm going to jump over here to week 2. Week 2, if your last name begins with the letters A through D, you're responsible for getting this first discussion kicked off by the end of the day, Tuesday. If your last name begins with the letters E through P, you're responsible for getting this one kicked off by the end of the day, Thursday, right? That's the kickoff days. Now, let me talk a little bit about the intention of the discussions, because the discussions can get overwhelming for all of us, right? I'm not looking for you guys just to repeat things over and over and over, because nobody would do that in a classroom, right? You wouldn't say the exact same thing that somebody else just said. And I get it, you're trying to demonstrate stuff to me, so there is good intentions there. But let's do our best to make this as conversational as possible, so that when we read through the discussion boards, it's kind of fun and flows like a discussion. I've got these word limits on here. Those are out of the hat. Let me tell you, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, but I'll bring it up again. The most important thing to me is that you convince me you're watching this stuff and you're thinking about it and you're using your own words to write, this is what I thought about these things, right? You convince me of that in, I don't know if it takes 150 words. Let's start with that, okay? But having said that, the content was pretty good. Grading. Basically, if you did everything I wanted you to do, you got full credit. If you were either late or didn't get the follow-up, you got pretty close to full credit. Do not get worried about grades at this point. Let's just figure out what we're doing. In terms of how things are going to be graded, let me talk about this for just a minute. I don't have an official point system, so don't get caught up on, well, this is only worth 10 points and this other thing's worth 100 points. Look at the syllabus, see what each element of the course is worth. The video discussions, it gets thrown in class participation. I forget how much of your grade it is off the top of my head. It's like 20 or 25%, right? So I'm just looking at those. Those are just numbers. 10 means it looks great. All right. Now, I'll talk about next week in a moment. Okay, getting ahead of myself. Too much coffee. I'm gonna have some more anyway. So let's talk a little bit then. That's detail, grading detail, how to do the next one. Let's talk a little bit about content. All right, maybe you need to see my face big to talk about content. And I'll do the Smedley Butler thing here, right? I'll take off my jacket while I'm talking so that you know that I'm serious. But I'm not going to roll my sleeves up because it's still kind of cold in here. Okay, content-wise, the mission was to discuss the thesis and the sub-thesis of Basil Davidson's pieces or his videos. And I thought you guys did a really good job of covering that stuff. So I don't feel too compelled to go into that in a lot of detail, but I want to go into a little bit of detail. His thesis for the entire series is simply Africans have a history of their own. That's it. It's as interesting, as ludicrous, as complicated, as simple as anyone else's history. But Africa has a history of its own, and it's worth studying. And one of the things that I think that you should pay attention to as we go through the rest of the series is, why does Basil Davidson feel compelled to beat that horse, right? it seems important. And one of the reasons that seems important is that he starts that whole scene, the whole first video, laying out this idea that he's got another thesis laid out that he starts off with, right? And that is that contemporary racism has not existed since the beginning of time. It had a particular moment in time in which racism, as we understand it, manifests itself. And that moment in time is the European Atlantic slave trade. And he makes this argument that it's at that moment in time that European perceptions of what Africa was changed. And that the one of the results of the African slave trade was a total erasure of African history, right? That's part of his argument. He's saying that, hey man, as a result of the Atlantic slave trade, one of the things that accompanied it was a total memory wipe. Otherwise, it seems a little inhumane, right? And I forget if it's Voltaire, I think it was Voltaire, who makes the statement, you guys double check me on this, that either the Africans aren't men, not human, or we're not Christian. And he makes that into the context of the African slave trade. Probably should have double checked that before I said anything. Voltaire, Descartes, maybe. You guys double check me. But the whole point is Basil Davidson is trying to set up the images from the Renaissance, right, as the evidence of this, and trying to look at pre-1500, 1600 contact between Africans and Europeans as a way of saying, and here's my point. Okay, that's the setup, right? So he takes the setup, it's like, all right, as a result of this slave trade, there's been this massive memory wipe of African history, and Basil Davidson feels compelled to help restore our memories. Okay, that's the big thesis. Now, the sub-thesis of this particular episode to help build into the Africans have a history of their own thesis goes something like this, right? He kind of starts off with, super old stuff. Looking at, ancient rock paintings in the Sahara when it was, green and that kind of thing. But getting into things like, chariots and horses and saddles, we're talking about animal domestication and all that. Excuse me. He doesn't do a whole lot with that yet. He'll come to that in another episode. But what he really does in this episode is, okay, if you don't think Africa has a history of its own, allow me to show you something you might be familiar with. And here comes Egypt. And he's like, what continent do you think Egypt's on? And then not only does he lay this out in terms of Egyptian civilization being an African civilization, he continues with that to make the argument, right, that so much of what we think of is Egypt is coming out of the south, the southern Nile. It's coming up out of Meroe. It's coming out of Nubia. And that is the argument he's laying out here. I bet you heard about Egypt. And if you heard about Egypt, you know something about African history. And when Basil Davidson put this video out in the mid 80s, there was a big brouhaha going on at the time over Africa's position in world history, in the sense of it kind of been sliced off the continent, and so there's a debate known as the Black Athena debate. This pretty interesting, where a scholar named Martin Brunell was making this argument that a lot of Greek culture was coming out of Egypt. Um, and it gets all connected into this concept known as Afrocentrism. And Cheikh Anta Diop, who is used in that video, and he's kind of showing the different kind of people that would have been in Egypt, was part of that. It's interesting to look at. It has progressed and developed over the last, whatever it is, 30 years. But the main point is Basil Davidson is attempting to reposition Africa, or Egypt, as African. And that is more or less the subthesis of the video, to get us thinking about African history. So on the one hand, he goes like straight to ancient history. The next video, not to spoil it too much, he's going to back up a little bit. And he's like, okay, pre-ancient stuff. What does stuff look like? So that was stuff for week 1, right? Now let's talk a little bit about what we're doing with week 2. All right. You guys watch my full video for this, right? But we're discussing the next set of the next video. Folks whose last name begins with letters A through D. You got to get that conversation kicked up by Tuesday. I think the deadline says it ends Thursday. Then we talk about episode 3. If your last name begins with the letters E through P, you got to get that kicked up by Thursday, okay? And it ends on Saturday. A comment about that. I got it. I've divvied the class up into about thirds for the purposes of the discussion of some of these videos, so it's not too burdensome. So if your last name begins with the letters A through D, you're going to be busy carrying the discussion. If you wish to participate, even at the highest level, as if it was required, be my guest. I encourage it. We'll run it as extra credit. It might even be the only extra credit I'll entertain, right? There's no reason to ask for extra credit later. You could have participated now. However, if you feel confident about things, I'm not going to hold it against you if you don't even make a peep during this discussion. Again, I'm trying to keep things manageable, okay? That's week 2. I want to do a quick preview about things just so that we're all clear about what's up. All right, week 3, we're doing the same thing here with Tuesday through Thursday, with the final episode for the moment with Basil Davidson. So if your last name begins with Q through Z, you're going to be required here. And then we get into the issue about our primary source analysis with Ibn Battuta in Black Africa, both our discussion and the paper you have due. So see the details, check it out now in case there are any questions. I'm under the impression I was clear enough. I haven't heard anything. If I need to expand on things, I will. And that ought to keep you busy for right now. And as I get a little bit of time this coming weekend in my head, weeks 4 and 5 totally cooked up. I just need to get the directions out so you know, so you understand how to do them. Week 6, 7, 8, and I think 9, still thinking it through, but about half baked. So slowly it's coming together, just don't have the videos out, so you're not going to be able to shoot out way far in advance. I don't know how you could. you got Ibn Battuta stuff to deal with right now. Make sure you got the book. Make sure you're reading. Get that discussion fired up right away, talking about it, figuring out what you're going to do. That's the reading you're supposed to be doing right now. All right. Having said that, you guys get those emails from me announcing virtual office hours a couple of times a week. You know how to contact me through the Canvas inbox. Let me know if you need anything. Otherwise, I just figure you're, busy learning about African history. So enjoy your historical studies and let me know if you need anything.